Spiritual Unfoldment. Part 3. Spiritual Unfoldment. The gradual development or revelation of the spiritual. Spiritual retardment. Lack of spiritual unfoldment. As the unfoldment comes, choices are to be made by the entity as to that course, or which course, the entity would pursue. Knowledge and application of the tenets of the law is given by the lawgiver, and as to how these apply in the relationships with men day by day. No, the experience in any sojourn is not to the glorifying or gratifying of the ego. That should be the result of the experience. This is self-evident. But the purposes, the hopes, the desires, the ideals must be founded in spiritual truths that are eternal in their concept. Thus the material expression is a gradual growth, an awakening, an unfoldment to the realization of the possibilities, the opportunities, the hopes, the desires that are before the entity in this present experience. Through what personal relationship in the present may our lives best fulfill their highest spiritual unfoldment, correlating the ideals of each in those experiences, when each indicated the best in their experience. They each, then, have that weakness of being able to be overpowered by the personality of the other. Then if there is the agreement, if there is the coordination of ideals and purposes, and making same work, it can be made a beautiful companionship. It also can be made to be the belittling of one or the other. But if the association or companionship is kept ever, as to the higher point for each, then they will both be the gainer thereby. In its unfoldment during the period the entity, as would be called now, took on the study of astrology or astrological activities, growing in the early period in the experiences as a dreamer, as a meditator, as a seeress or prophetess, making those associations with the peoples of then Far East. Coming early in its experience to the conclusions, from its own experiences, that the looked-for changes were coming in the holier promised land, the entity. Before the birth of the Christ child. Made many journeys, and finally there were the closer associations with the leader of the Essenes, and the entity dwelt in Carmel. Through those associations there came more communications and interpretations of those records or signs that eventually brought the journeys of some of the wise men, of which we have records. These were the highlights of the entity's experiences through that particular period of activity. John the Baptist was Elijah. The last chapter of Malachi tells you so in so many words. 4th chapter and 5th verse, then Jesus tells his disciples in Matthew 17 and 12, that who it is. So don't think he was Moses also. Yes. Jesus told the multitude that the 12 would judge the 12 tribes, so it is numbers here are answers to the 12 centers of emotion and body. For as is said in last, it is not chance there are given 3 patriarchs. They represent definite conditions of our body. They are personal as well as mental and spiritual, they are conditions of consciousness in our lives' unfoldments. Through the Jupiterian sojourn we have the broad expanse of association and activity, so that in this present year, and in the coming year there should be the advancement to the entity's greater opportunities in this present experience. Not that this entity or any other is to rest upon that which is attained. For each activity, each opportunity becomes a greater unfoldment in the experience to minister, to give to others, that which is ennobling, hopeful, in their own activities. As to be the more helpful to them. For each soul enters into activity through a material sojourn, not only for a mental and material development, but for a solar internal growth also, in its relationships to that purpose which it is to accomplish or fill. For, to be active only for self-indulgence, self-aggrandizement, selfish emotions, or for the power that may be attained through such activity, is only to fool self and defeat the purposes. And as each soul sows, so must it also reap, in whatever environs its activities are meted. Whether mental, spiritual or purely physical or emotional. The heavens declare the glory of God, and as to how nature sings his praises in the rebirth at each period, each cycle, for its unfoldment and growth, as manifested in entities that are, as man, a manifestation of his love in the earth. Know that thy spirituality, as well as thy mental concept, must be interpreted in the practical life and associations of the day. In the spiritual life ye grow in grace, in knowledge, in understanding of the law of God, ye also in the mental life grow in unfoldment, in the awareness of thy associations with spiritual and material activities. So in the mental and spiritual, these throw off. Dear, sweet 275. As I think back over the years I have known and loved you, I am reminded of a few quotes from the readings like these. Who may tell the rose how to be beautiful? Who may tell the snow how to be white? These come from the experience of the entities that attune themselves to God. These ye will find, then, in thy music, in thy home, in thy love for art. In these ye may find the outlet. Teach others. By precept, yes, but most of all by pattern. For the peoples then understood, even better than they do today, that the heavens declare the glory of God, as to how nature sings his praises in the rebirth at each period, each cycle, for its unfoldment and growth as manifested in entities that are, as man, a manifestation of his love in the earth. Turn then to those things within. Know the law, and then apply it daily. Not by some great thing. Smile often. Speak gently. Speak kindly. Go out of the way, to do a kind deed, and ye will find that he will walk closer with thee, and thy life, thy purpose will become a glorious thing in this experience. Keep the mental attitude towards constructive forces ever. Smile even though it takes the hide off. Then from your own last reading. Much has been given the body as to its mental and spiritual development. Seek within. Use the energies that are known, for thy body is indeed the temple of the living God. Thy portion, thyself is beautiful before him. Keep that attitude of constructiveness, ever. For many, many will indeed call thee blessed. If ye keep in the way ye have set before thee. Attune thyself to the spheres in thine own vibrations and ways. Let the Lord keep thee. He desires much of thee. Happy birthday. Love and blessings to all of you. So dear. Gladys. It is not by chance that an entity enters materialization or material manifestation at some particular period. For there is work to do for all, and that work is to be the living manifestation of the concept of each entity in the material plane of that which is its ideal. For, as he hath given, it is ever line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, that man may make for that unfoldment, which brings into the experience of self as well as the fellow man. The relationships he bears to that creative force we call God. As to the abilities of the entity, that to which it may attain and how. Applying self in most any of those activities which have been a part of the experience, these may be used as channels and outlets for the greater unfoldment for the entity, but do write stories for children. Do work with teenage girls especially. Yes, we are given the records of that entity now known as or called 2787. A beautiful record. In giving the interpretations of the records as we find them here, much of these we find too beautiful to be classified, or even called experiences. For, there has been a growth of this entity throughout the material sojourns. Not that there have not been wanderings at times, but a growth and an unfoldment. These records are written upon time and space. Just as light goes out from a candle influencing the universe, the light that goes out from a life influences all with whom it comes in contact. And grows, dependent upon the spirit with which it is tempered. Then in patience these records may be interpreted. Before that the entity was also in the Atlantean land, among the sons of that one who first set about to choose that way, in which there would be those applications for the benefit of the group, rather than just individual application. When those activities brought about the united efforts that had been proclaimed by the entity's father. The entity then unified the usages of spiritual laws to the awakening or unfoldment of the activities for the benefits of the brotherhood of man. As it unified itself against those destructive forces in the forms of those projections that had become as torments to those who chose the law of one. In the experience the entity applied itself in that of the universal brotherhood. Before that the entity was in the Egyptian land, during those periods of what is termed the reconstruction, or the development of individuals to particular or definite activities in the vocational forces. There the entity was most active in the temple of sacrifice, with its establishments and the abilities for using those things which had been presented from the Atlanteans, where electrical force is used as the means for removal of forms of appendages, or of those things that caused forms of reaction in the combination of the brain forces of body influence and the environmental forces as produced through those periods of unfoldment of knowledge and the use of same in the experience of individual lives. As he gave, that I may sit upon the right hand and my brother upon the left. These are not to be given, they are prepared for those who have through their meeting with their fellow men, manifested that which brings them into that association, that consciousness, that unfoldment as to where they may become, that which may in the greater manner manifest that love of the Father to the children of men. As to when. No man knoweth, only the Father. In choosing the interpretations as we find them for this entity from these records, we choose those that may be helpful and beneficial to the entity, not only in its analyzing of itself, but in the application of itself in the directions in which, if there is the practical application, the greater development or unfoldment may come to the entity. The body of each entity is the temple of the living God. There he has promised to meet the entity. To live, to be. And that activity. Unto the glory of the creative forces is the purpose of the entrance of each entity into material consciousness. That accomplished in any experience, is unto that unfoldment of the awareness of the oneness of self with that creative force which it, the entity, would magnify. Would smoking be detrimental to me or beneficial? This depends very much upon self. In moderation, smoking is not harmful, but to a body that holds such as being out of line with its best mental or spiritual unfoldment, do not smoke. Before that the entity was in the Persian land, during those periods when there were those peoples seeking for the new unfoldment that had begun in Egypt by the new regime or new rule there. The entity, as a princess, sought those communications, lived in Egypt, that they might better understand and interpret those changes wrought there, at the time of the return of the priest. In the application of self, right. And teach the young. The interest in children, especially, and the greater joys and the greater sorrows will come from these associations. But the abilities, and that to find peace, unfoldment, and development, arise from the activities through those periods in which the entity may apply itself in the present. Study, then, to approve thyself unto that ideal thou hast chosen. Spiritually, mentally, materially. In Venus we find the love of home, beauty, and especially music. Do give music to one of thy children. Do instruct and follow thyself with this unfoldment in them, for it will aid in unfolding thy own awareness. Before this, then, we find that the entity was in the land of the present sojourn, during that particular period of settlings around parts of Maryland, when there were definite associations of groups as related to the spiritual growth, or spiritual unfoldment, the seeking for abilities of self-expression. Thus to the entity in the present we find there must be freedom of thought, there must be freedom of expression. Do not merely have a verbal or vocal ideal. Do write what is thy ideal. Begin with that under these three headings, spiritual, mental, material. And write what is thine own ideal. As ye may find, these may change from time to time. For, each soul grows in grace, in knowledge, in understanding. Just as the awareness, the unfoldments come to the self as the entity applies, that it has chosen, and does choose from day to day. And ye will find, this will enable thee to find, that ye choose as thy spiritual ideal must be able to answer for every disturbance, for every hope, for every desire, as of a spiritual nature. Then, as ye meditate upon same, in the mind, ye may find same manifested in thy material experiences. Whether this be in the assurances sought, as to thy judgment, or in that to enable thee to choose thy activity, or as to the attitude or the activity ye would apply in thy dealings with others. What is the spiritual and mental opportunity I have to demonstrate more perfect vision as related in the physical reading? The demonstration to be made is better cooperation in body, mind and spirit or soul of the entity. Thus definite decisions in self as to attitudes towards all activities of body, mind and purpose, or the choosing of the ideals. In choosing ideals for the body, don't trust to the memory, don't trust to the thinking that this I believe, for you change it often, but write it down. Body. Mind. Soul. Begin with the soul, what is thy ideal? The answer must be within self and of Jesus, the Christ. This, to be sure, is first, last and always. Then, what is the ideal mentally? This should be. How much meditation, how much application, how much appreciation. These, as we find, may be subdivided or, as changes come each day, rub out and change. What is the mind and the spirit as referred to body ideal? See the body perfect in vision, in thought, in purpose. This is now the purpose of physical, not purpose of the mental. What is the ideal relationship which should exist between self, home, friends, activities in relation to things as well as conditions, as well as experiences? Change these as there is unfoldment in the study of thine own self.